to me, this is the 12-team playoff working. Like the fact that they weeded out some of the weaker teams earlier and there were some blowouts, but we got to very evenly matched games in the semifinals and 2 absolutely deserving teams to the championship. Like that's the system working.
I agree with you. It's so intriguing because again, like I am not a huge fan of this system, but the one thing that I can say is like Ohio State as a team that would not have been in other years, they had to take a really difficult path to get to a national championship game, and for them to win those games and to win them the way that they have, I think it erases the questions about how good they could be or did they deserve and all those different things. It's like no, to your point, you like saying we want to settle these things out on the field. Well, you got to play a team from the SEC that's really good. And then you got to play the number 1 team in the country. Then you got to play another team from the SEC that's really good. They did it. Similar thing for Notre Dame is the path that they had to take, knocking off Georgia. That certainly goes a long way. But also this idea of, boy, maybe we shouldn't make these judgments about teams in week 2 and say that's who they are for the rest of the year. And I was a part of one of those teams where people could have made a judgment about us in week 2 and said that's who we are for the rest of the year, and we won a title. So I think from that standpoint, I've been very pleased with it. Also, all you people out there who wanted Cinderellas, you got a 7, you got an 8. They're just blue bloods. That's who Cinderellas are in this format, but you got them, so congratulations.
It's true that they are kind of the quote Cinderellas. Like this system is going to be set up that the blue bloods are going to get the Mulligans, and they did, right? Like these are the 2 worst losses of teams that made it to the playoff that we were talking about. The Northern Illinois loss, like obviously that's the worst loss of any team in the field. And then Michigan, even though again, they're going to finish the season with 8 wins, they beat Alabama in a bowl game. That was like an inexcusable loss for Ohio State. And those are the teams that got better afterwards, still had a chance to prove it on the field in the playoff, which is such an interesting dynamic because I think a lot of people said, hey, that's going to happen, right? Like these are going to be the teams that are going to make it. You just don't get 3 Mulligans. We did learn that. We learned that this year with some of the SEC teams, but you could get 1.
I'm not mad about. I'm not mad about
2.
Which again, like, given Saturday, maybe you don't have your best stuff. I understand that. The thing that to your point about getting the Mulligans though, these teams learned, right? They learned their lesson. Mm-hmm. They learned from their mistakes. And I feel like that's the biggest part of this whole process is you're allowed to evolve as a team and like you can get better. And if you prove to us that you got better, you should be able to continue to compete. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right. And I actually think Notre Dame is maybe a more interesting example of this. I know we all keep saying about like Michigan, the Michigan game and how that kind of spurred Ohio State to do things differently, maybe call games differently. There's a lot that we can dive into there. But Notre Dame has basically been in a playoff since mid-September. They knew they couldn't lose again. They knew they had the 1 Mulligan. And you and I said it over and over at the time. They were going to make the playoff. They won out. Right. It didn't matter who the loss was. Like 1 loss, Notre Dame makes it. And they knew that. And so like this idea of like do or die, they've been living that since mid-September. And I've talked to Riley Leonard about that. And I think that has absolutely fueled the way that they have come back in some of these games, or just like the way that they there's a mental and a physical toughness in that team that they have just developed over months and months.
Yeah. I mean, first off, we knew that a 1-loss Notre Dame would make it in. Notre Dame knew that. But all the people on Twitter, for some reason, could not comprehend that until they actually saw it happen. This is one of the teams in the title. I think that's a lesson for us as viewers of the sport, and maybe like the first year of this new thing that none of us know about. We shouldn't say what is definitively going to happen. But I can speak to this idea of every week being that urgent in the locker room, and what that does to of course, there's a physical aspect of it where like you have to exert yourself knowing that if you don't give it your all for your teammates, that you might not have a chance to achieve the ultimate goal. But there is this mental process of getting comfortable with pressure and not just being comfortable, but like really leaning into it. And there's this mental process of how you learn, right? Like you have to be extremely critical in the situations where you don't have a lot of margin for error. And I think that team is one that had to get really comfortable, probably saying things out loud that most teams would try to soften up because they didn't have the leeway to try to, deliver the message and temper it. Like they had to get real with each other. And I think that's an important thing for a team too.
One last point, we'll have plenty of time to kind of like debrief the 12-team playoff when all is said and done, do a
Yes.
postmortem. But one last point is I saw that there were Georgia fans out there and different fans of different fan bases who were eliminated or not in the playoff. You know, watching like Penn State, Notre Dame being like, we could beat either of those teams, whatever. We you lost your chance to do that when you lose a game. And I think college football fans have lived in these hypotheticals for a really, really long
Hmm.
time because only a couple teams actually played it out in the field. And when we talk about what do we learn, how do we talk about the sport, how do we think about it moving forward? Again, yeah, not eliminating teams in September off of one
Right.
bad loss because they
Right.
could get better and they could go on a run like this. But also, you get your chance. And if it, you can't just say, well, it was this, erase these three plays. Well, then erase the three best plays for the other team. Or, whatever. You don't get to do the hypotheticals when we actually are deciding it on the field and you have to go through these games to win a national championship. You don't get to do that anymore because
Right.
we actually get the data. We actually watch it play out and you have to win the games that matter. I even saw some Texas fans being like, well, if you, erase the one long run and this, okay, then erase your best
Okay.
plays too. You don't
Right.
get to do that. You play the game that happens.
Yeah,
And
I mean, take away
I
the
think
9
people need to
penalties
get
for
used to that.
Ohio State, right? Like, we could do this all day long. I
No,
love
I know
that
that's what I'm
point.
saying. But I'm saying I don't think
Yeah.
people are used to like, no,
No.
you get your answers. Like
Right.
it may not be your best A game, but that was the game that got played, you know?
And frankly, for me too, if you're a fan of a team who lost in this playoff by a double-digit margin, like, I really don't think you need to be engaging in the hypotheticals about the other teams that you might have seen and what could have happened. Because when you face the best teams that you had to play in this playoff, the result was the result, right? Like, I think the one thing that I always felt pretty good about when it came to this format is that ultimately the best team was going to win it, even if there were these upsets, because there's so many data points from having a
3
long
or 4
postseason.
games you'd have to go through to get to the end.
Exactly. And just whoever that team is probably rises to the occasion in the end. And so, like, for some of these people having hypotheticals, you ended up playing really good teams, right? Like, this is
Right.
what happens when you play good teams.
Right. And we've said it. You got to be deep because you got to deal with a lot of injuries. We've seen that with
Yeah.
Notre Dame. We've seen that with
Yes.
Ohio State.
Yes.
And you've got to be good. You've got to be good in the moments where the game is decided. And
Mhm.
both of these teams did.